I want to start. You and I were just talking about your boys, and I have so much respect for the manner that you work with them on their golf game. And I was reminded of that over the weekend watching Rory McIlroy win the FedEx Cup. And I remember you telling me that his approach to the game is what's going to make a difference to his career. Tell me what that's all about because I got a hint of that on Sunday.
Well, I don't think I don't remember saying that, but uh, you just saying that that doesn't just apply to him. That applies to anyone. It's always about the approach. It's always about the lens through which you look at something. It's never really about the X's and the O's.
What do you see in him? What got him over the top?
I don't think it really goes anywhere to say, well, this is what he did, and so everyone can learn from that and go do the same thing. Those things don't go anywhere. Those are just sort of pats on the back that they don't mean anything. Um, I think it's much more effective and applicable and practical to talk about what it is that prevents performance, um, much more than what it is that enhances it. I think knowing what the not is a far more effective route than because no one really knows what the is,
Hmm.
and so the knots are actually it's a much more effective route to go.
What is that? Because there's obviously a strand of DNA that separates these world class performers from the rest of the world. What do they see that the rest of us don't?
I don't think that's once again. I very much shy away from the 7 habits of effective people, and I just
As do
to,
I.
to I yeah, I don't I don't want to put anyone on a pedestal and say, well, these guys are great, and I just don't. I don't. I think every human being has the potential to be great, and so I don't think anyone should follow anyone or look up to anyone. So, um, first of all, I don't think that tour players should be compared against weekend golfers. I think that's scraping the bottom of the barrel. That makes no sense. Well, why wouldn't you be better than a
Hmm.
weekend golfer? And weekend golfers are used as scapegoats to make the tour player look better. So it really is judging within the PGA Tour than it is PGA Tour versus your 72-year-old with arthritis. I mean, what kind of comparison is that? I mean, if you have to go that low, then you must not be very good. So why would you compare yourself against the lowest people in terms of their ability and their age and so forth? So, what is it that makes someone truly exceptional? And I think it really comes down to understanding an understanding of how the game is played, an understanding of what things are standing in my way that has prevented me from getting to where I want to go. I think it's much more about the roadblocks than it is the signs and the arrows saying go this way. Um, so, if you look at someone like Tiger, um, there's a lot of things that went into that in creating a Tiger Woods, and it wasn't it wasn't all X's and O's. In fact, X's and O's were I would say it's the minority because others have the same, if not better, X's and O's than Tiger, uh, but no one had his results. So that means that there must be something else. And it's always in the intangibles. It's always in the viewpoint. It's always in the level of drive, the level of inspiration, the willingness to examine the things that the majority in the culture do not examine. It's always in those types of things. It's in the soft things, not in the things that you can categorize and put on a blackboard, which is where society always looks. Society is the culture of golf is no different than the culture of business because it is filled with the same kinds of human beings who are afflicted by the same disorder of looking at the cosmetic and looking at the form, as opposed to looking at the source from which those things arise.
So, like when you talk about Tiger, for example, and when you talk about the intangibles, I know that a lot of times that leads back to introspection and it leads back to the mind. Give me an example of some of these intangibles.
Um, for instance, Ernie Els once said when he was, I think Tiger had won by 15 shots the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, and they interviewed Ernie Els afterwards, and it's a wonderfully illustrative interview because first of all, he was getting hammered by questions, and the grace with which he handled the questions was very impressive. I mean, some of the questions were very insulting, actually, and they shouldn't have been asked that way. But he still handled it with real calmness and grace. And one of the things that he said was, this guy shows up every single week to a tour event and he's at 115%. His drive, his level of focus, his concentration, his, you know, is off the charts every single week. And he said, I can't say that about any other tour player. So that's an intangible. That isn't a swing plane issue. That isn't a grip issue. That isn't a how far do you hit the ball issue. That isn't a TrackMan issue, right? There's no technique there. You can't methodize that. So that and the bang for the buck there is huge.
Right.
To have that drive is the foundation upon which everything is built.
So
that level of motivation.
Where does it come from? Right.
Well, where does that come from exactly? I don't know. I mean, I don't know where DNA comes from, but Tiger's DNA has always been, I don't want to just win tournaments. I want to be the best of all time. And that's always been his drive. Where does that come from? Why did that arise in him and not in another player? I don't know. I don't know why we have the DNA that we have. But that's always been his driving force. It isn't to win golf tournaments. It's been to be the best of all time, to be a legend.
Would you put Serena Williams in that category?
I don't know enough about Serena Williams, but I do know that their upbringing was very interesting. You know, Richard Williams did a lot of very interesting things, and once again, he was a real rule breaker. He was an outcast. He was an anti-culturalist, and you will find that thread amongst all greatness. It's never been the rule follower. It's never been the traditionalist. It's always these people who do everything outside the box, not letting them play junior tournaments. When the girls were young, playing on a tennis court in which gunshots were going on in the background, and not moving the family because the gunshots going off in the background would allow them to force them to focus and become, have thicker skin. A lot of very interesting things, a lot of eccentricities there that are very noteworthy.
So where do you see the role of coaches, Kapil, with people like that? Like if they're sitting in a locker room talking to their coach, or a couple days before a tournament or a match talking to their coach, what are they talking about?
I think it's much less important or instructive as to what they're talking about as it is to talk about the role of coaching. I think that just like all things, it depends upon the DNA of the coach. And just like there is no Tiger Woods besides Tiger Woods, there really is no coach like that. So it isn't about coaching. It's about the coach. It's about the human. And to find a human who completely shatters the norm, who turns his back on everything, who rejects all norms and traditions, those types of humans are very, very rare. And so it isn't about coaching, because that doesn't mean anything. That's just regular people with regular DNA going to the seminars, wearing their lanyards, getting certified, and teaching a bunch of crap. That isn't coaching. That just means nothing. I mean, it doesn't matter what they're talking about. It's drivel. It's about what is that rare one in a million Tiger Woods type individual? What is that conversation like? That's instructive, not what the norm is like. Who cares?
Well, you're a coach and you're playing a big role in the development of both of your boys who have very ambitious futures, and you're coaching some very prominent, very successful leaders in the world. How do you see your role with them?
It's very different as a parent than it is as with a client.
Sure.
And not because it should be, but because it is. And that's actually a flaw. That's a flaw in me. And the flaw is that where there is attachment, there is interference. And so the greatest role that I can provide is the one that I haven't provided yet. I have done okay, but nowhere near perfection. And one approaches perfection when there is no emotional involvement, no desire in me for the student to do well. As long as that exists, there necessarily must be interference.
So let's stick with that for a moment, and then we'll get to the leaders where there is a little bit different of a relationships. Your boys are really, really close. When do you start? How do you know the time's right for you to move closer towards maybe eliminating that interference?
Um, I think the interference is always there, so the time is always right. So it's about approaching the state in which everything is on the player and finding that line as to when to say, when not to say. And that is not done prescriptively. That is done by first reaching the internal place where you need nothing from their performance. And so I guess what I'm saying as I'm hearing myself speak is that the ultimate parenting becomes not being a parent at all or a coach. The ultimate parenting becomes one in which you divorce yourself from the need or the desire for an outcome. There must be nothing in it for you. I think that is the bar. I think that is the place of truth, which upon reaching it, one does not interfere.
Well, for you, the knowing you the way that I've gotten to know you, you want the best for them, right? That's how do you separate yourself from that? That'll always be there.
I think it's no parent wants the best for them without being attached to the pleasure of wanting the best for them.
Right.
So we don't ever, no parent is that pure that they want the best for them only for them, and there's nothing in it for them, for the parent. There's always a level of impurity, and there's always a level of there's always as they say, a fly in the ointment.
Well, it's tough to see your kids suffer. So
Well,
maybe that's what's in
I
it
don't,
for you,
I'm
right?
not talking about tough. I'm not. See, I don't want to justify it by saying that's okay to be that way because it's tough. I'm talking about truth. It's all about truth. So I don't care if it's tough, right? I don't want to justify it. I don't want to say it's okay. It's not okay. It it's it is. If there is a journey, the journey is in getting to the place where you are concerned only with you. If you are concerned only with you, that actually is the most selfless way to be, as ironic as that may sound. because as long as you need someone else to do well, you will interfere and you will say, well, I'm doing it for them, and you're not. It may be on a fringe level that they're gaining something from it, no doubt, but you are not doing anything, you're not doing it for them. And so this is a very difficult conversation to have because very few people are at the level of desire to actually want to divorce themselves from the need or the desire to have something in it for them. Therefore, they will go to the place where you went, which is, well, nobody wants to see their kids suffer, and it's very difficult to get to that place, and that's only natural, and it's human nature. I don't care about any of that stuff. That isn't truth. That's just cop out, okay? And I'm not telling you I'm there. I'm actually pointing the finger at me uh, live and telling you that that is a source of interference.
How do you ever specifically think about ways that you can help your boys in particular, certainly some of the athletes that you work with, learn how to embrace pressure? The pressure to
No,
make
I don't.
a putt on the 18th
I don't. I
hole.
don't know if it's about embrace. That's forced. I don't like embrace and um, accept. Verbs are don't sit well with me because it's always prescriptive. Um, it, it
So why do certain
it
people thrive in the most intense of moments when
there's no why to that. Some people just do. They enjoy it, and some people do not. The the question only arises when someone comes forward and says that I have a problem, and the problem is that pressure really gets to me. Then it becomes a something to go into because
and
then the person actually wants to do something about it. Um, so then it becomes relevant.
so what do you do to coach somebody through that?
Well, it's never about the thing, right? The thing is never about the thing.
Hmm.
So the pressure is just the manifestation of something that's going on deeper. And so, what is it the person feels that they might lose by winning? What is it that the person feels that they might lose by losing? So, the pressure is the billboard, but the billboard isn't the truth. It's the wires and following the wires all the way back through their winding source to where they're plugged into that gives electricity to that billboard. That's where the real questions lie. And the issue with teachers and instructors and psychologists and coaches is that they fall for the problem that they're presented. They fall for that trap. And therefore they attempt to fix the billboard.
Hmm.
But the billboard never is the problem. The problem that's presented to you is never the problem.
Well,
I
you
think
talk to
therein lies the art of coaching.
well, you talk about to a lot of sports psychologists, and they tell you that dealing with pressure is something that can be taught.
Well,
Do you believe that?
no, no, I don't because you'll never own it that way. I think what a person needs to learn is not the techniques of how to deal with pressure. What he needs to learn is the understanding and the insight as to why the pressure gets to him and what things are truly at stake. That if those things weren't at stake, then the pressure would automatically not get to him.
Well, you shared something with me earlier about something that about when I asked you a question about your son, and you talked about the importance of ownership. That when that ownership, when that real full fledged ownership is there, then you'll start to see the type of progress that you want to see. What does that type of ownership look like?
Yeah, it's a dangerous word when you just mentioned it nakedly without context, because I know where everyone's going to go with that. They're going to jump all over the prescription bandwagon, and the bold type word and say ownership is that you must own and be, own your actions and be responsible for what you said. That's not what we're talked about. So let's just short circuit that real quick before that train leaves the station. Uh, ownership. What we were talking about earlier was we were talking about ball striking, and so the ownership of one's artistic movement, in this case, striking a golf ball. Um, so to me, it needs to be owned without any chases, and something cannot be owned if you attack the mechanics and the technique and use that as the lens through which you look at the movement. Because as long as you look at the technique and the mechanics of put your arm here, then the next step is do this, and then don't go across the line, don't get laid off. When you come back down, the hips lead the downswing, and then you swing left and make sure the club face is square at impact. All those things, and the track mans, and all the nonsense. When you chase it that way, you chase forever, because you can never own a physical movement by focusing on the actual physical movement. You have to own the things that you already have, which give you clues as to whether the physical movement is on or off,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a coach standing behind you telling you that they're on or off. And if you look at the evidence for that being the truth, you have people on the PGA Tour who've been working with a swing coach for 30 years, or various different ones. Well, shouldn't you have owned it by now? What have you been doing for 30 years? So that must mean that very fact that they still need someone to tell them that think something is off and that this is off and that this is off. That means that they are relying upon an external agency to guide their physical movement. Therefore, they cannot arrive at ownership. It's like Tiger said once. Tiger said there are only two guys who own their swing: Mo Norman and Ben Hogan. And they woke up every single day. This is his quote. They woke up every single day knowing that they were going to hit it well. Now he said that in a way that's like it's mystical,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
And actually that is mystical in today's form and technique and method obsessed environment. That is mystical. But that is all that matters. It's about putting an end to all the chases. And it also comes down to who you are. Like it isn't that anyone needs to listen to me. Um, this is just not okay with me to not own something. But if someone else might say, and the majority actually would say this, they would say, what's wrong if I have to work with a coach and I hire the coach? Listen, I got 20 million in the bank. I'll hire a coach, stand behind me,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I have a question, I put him on speed dial and said, hey, why my ball going right and left? He'll come stand behind me and go, what's wrong with that? And I would say, nothing's wrong with that. Nothing's wrong with it. I could never do that. That to me would make me cringe. That means I'll never own anything. That like Nicholas said. Nicholas said that he saw his coach once a year, and Jack Grout never once stepped onto a tournament grounds, and because he wanted Jack to be his own coach, and that allowed him in the middle of a round in the back nine on Sunday to be able to fix his own swing. Well, you're not going to have that if you have speed dial coaches. So it depends what's important to you. And if that's okay with you, then that's okay with you. It depends upon the person.
Well, that's really intriguing to me because let's shift gears for a second and talk about how that translates to a leader running a company. You coach. You may not want to call yourself a coach. You work with leaders who are running big companies, important companies, prominent companies. What is your role with them? How do you ignite that human potential from them?
I don't know. I don't know what it is that I do. I just don't know. I don't remember conversations. I don't remember how results came about. I didn't make any specific result come about. The only thing that my allegiance is to is the truth. And so the one thing that I can say with absolute certainty, the one thing that I do know is that when a human being is exposed to the truth, something fundamental within him begins to change. And I don't know how that alchemy happens, but it is an elixir that is too potent to not have an effect.
So when do you know? Is it in the questions they're asking you? Is it in the dialogue that you guys are having? When do you get a glimpse that that person that you are a confidant to is getting closer to that truth? Because there's a level of ownership there too, right? They have to own it, just like we're talking about these
Yeah,
professional athletes.
yeah. When they notice that the reactions that they normally had to things are now different without them trying to do anything different. That's when you know something has changed, something fundamental. Without any practice, no practice, no behavior change, no implementation of a technique or a method, no deep breath, no when this happens, I will walk away and count to five. Nothing, nothing. When the initial reaction to the thing is fundamentally different than it normally is, than it has been for years, without having done a thing, that means something in the viscera has changed.
And does that mean a heightened level of awareness of themselves? Is that where a lot of this stuff starts for these leaders?
I think where a lot of it starts is the movement away from prescriptive ways of thinking. I think that is the greatest tectonic shift which occurs in a human being is the movement away from the how.
Well, it takes a hell of a lot of guts sometimes, especially in business, when you receive funding from a significant amount of funding. You've got people on your board who have achieved a level of success and acclaim, and who are almost kind of um, expecting you to follow a certain path because they want a return on their money. It takes a lot of courage to say, no, I'm going to do it a different way.
It only takes courage if it is acceptable to you to do it the traditional way. It doesn't take courage if doing it according to the way within you is non negotiable. See, this can't be an intellectual decision. Then it's courage. And then it usually it reverts. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't last.
Mm-hmm.
So only when you can't do it that way and you're willing to be fired. Not that you should, not that that's good, not that that's courageous, but for whatever reason, you just can't it goes against your nature. That's not courageous. That's just inevitable.
Without naming names, do you have some examples of some situations with some of the people that you've worked with who have been able to have that level of ownership and have started to recognize their approach or their reaction to certain things has shifted, and what type of impact has that had on their companies?
Oh, absolutely. But none of those were orchestrated by me.
Well, of course
Uh,
they were,
I,
because you're the
you
one
know,
that initiated the dialogue and asked the question.
no, because there was no, because I had no goal in mind,
Sure, right. But it
right?
was you that initiated it, because if it wasn't for you, it may maybe not necessarily the prescriptive approach, but we would have continued to do what we would have done. That's the truth.
Well, okay, but I'm saying it happened by side effect, right? It happened as a natural effect of a cause.
Hmm.
It wasn't because I did this. I'm the most clueless of all as to what I might have done. I don't even know what I said yesterday. You asked me four questions to begin this dialogue. I didn't remember any of them.
I
So,
figured.
okay, there's nothing, like, as you said, prescriptive that I did to make that happen because I wasn't even looking for something to happen.
But you
It's
helped
just
me
it's just
see.
a it is just a it is not it is just an exposure to the truth. That's what it is.
Hmm.
It isn't that I said this
But you
or I.
but you led me there. Your questions led me to maybe explore areas or observe certain things that perhaps I was blind to in the past.
Maybe. But even, I mean, if I may be honest, those things sort of came through me. They didn't really come from me. So I'm very hesitant to take any credit for anything because I because I don't own it. It just appears. So I can't walk around with a billboard saying, "Look what I did." It just came, and so if it came, that means it came from somewhere else. So that's the owner, right? It wasn't me. But yeah, maybe in the in the exchange, in the dialogue, in the examination, the exploration, that some things came out that, as you said, made the person look at it differently, and um, made a shift by way of a question. Absolutely, those things do happen.
And do you see that once that shifted, when you recognize it as their confidant, coach, whatever you want, when you recognize that somebody's made that shift and have consistently gone to a different approach to handle these things, do you see it sustainable? Do I just kind of live there now?
Yeah, that's the difference between prescription and truth. Um, there are some consistent phrases that I'll hear again and again from people who have experienced this, and that is that, well, I would rather die than go back and be the old way.
Sure.
And so the thing about truth is that once you transform, you never transform back. But in change through behavior or prescription or therapy, you tend to for the whole of your life, you tend to always live in a flux of today I was good and yesterday wasn't so good, and you always flux back and forth. You change back.
Hmm. But when you get a glimpse of that truth, you feel that resorting back to the old ways is torture compared to living in the space that I'm living right now.
Yes, because the only reason that you were doing it the old way to begin with was based upon your level of understanding, which resulted in you doing it the old way. Once you arrive at a new level, then that means that your fundamental understanding has changed. So therefore, the inevitable way now is the higher level.
You mentioned you show up differently because of the relationship with the leaders that you work with, obviously, as opposed to the boys. How do you show up for the CEOs or founders, executives that you work with?
By not showing up.
So I have a meeting with you in 15 minutes. What are you thinking about? Do you just show up, and is it just basically me coming to you with, hey, here's the shit that I'm dealing with?
Yeah, the greatest so-called input that I could provide is input that does not come directly from my mind. It comes something that comes in a channeling, speaking in tongues fashion through me that I do not interfere with. That is the best way that I can provide insight. So I literally mean that when I say, how do I show up by not showing up?
Hmm. And do you help them? I mean, do you give the people that you're working with homework to
No,
do to
my
think about
God.
it?
No, how could you even go there? Never in a million years.
So you don't go there. There's no
Homework about what?
go read this book or go think about this or go journal
No,
on that. You
no,
don't do that.
no, no. There's no prescriptions. There's no activity. There's no behavior. There's no practice. Those are all prescriptive modalities that make you focus upon an activity in the hopes that the execution of that activity will lead to a fundamental change, but it will not. It will only make you focus upon the activity itself, and therefore you will get better and better at doing the activity, but will not reach the thing for which the activity was prescribed.
Makes a hell of a lot of sense. A couple questions that I promised some people that I'd ask you. There are a lot of people out there that listen to us who are in the business of selling. And that group seems to always be motivated by beating last quarter and last year. And that becomes exhausting. When you talk to, you know, elite salespeople about how do they start to develop or what mindsets they need to get in to develop a level of sustained excellence where it isn't the goal, it's something bigger. What should they be thinking about?
Well, they're too focused, if that's their approach, they're too focused upon selling the other without having first sold themselves.
Well, that's the training that they get, right? That's the prescription
Mm,
that they get from
well,
everybody, right?
well,
You've been sold
if it
cars.
is, it's not effective. I mean, the it's easy to sell something when you know that selling it for any price at all is too low,
Sure.
and no one gets there, or very few get there. So it isn't about selling to another. It is about examining what you really have, what the truth about it really is, um, and the the place about your product where you are, that is the success or the failure in your selling it.
Like, give me an example of what you're talking about when you say the place.
Um, the 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 level of the level to which you are convinced that this thing will do X uh, better than anything else, or that you can't get it anywhere else, then the selling will arise from there, and you won't have to do much selling.
Mm-hmm.
It'll sell. Um, the problem is that people don't get to that place, and they're not really taught to get to that place. And even if they are, they're not done so prescriptively, so it's a non-starter. Um, I mean, if you're selling used shoes, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter then, because it depends what you have. And if what you're selling is a commodity that everyone on the corner is selling, then you will likely be tempted to sell based upon price. And that is a road to nowhere. That's a road to poverty. Um, so if you have, for instance, a restaurant, and there are other restaurants who are obviously selling the same type of food that you are, then the issue becomes one of marketing. And marketing is a very, very interesting subject because it is all about the human mind. And it is not about, once again, we return to the same place. It is not about technique and method. And I wrote a discourse about this not too long ago, and I don't know what it's called. The truth about
I saw it.
what was it called?
I don't remember the exact title, but I saw it and shared it with a bunch of people. That's actually where this question came from.
Okay, okay. Um, you know that it's a very fascinating topic uh, because it's all about the mind of human beings and not about the 15 things that you can do to get the word out.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, and I've never gone there with you about this idea of marketing, right? And it's something that maybe at some point, I think you said something, and I may be screwing it up. It's about why all marketing is a scam, or why
Yes, yes, yes,
something to that
yes. That sounds
effect,
about right.
right?
Yes.
It would be it'd be a fascinating conversation that we could have because that's a whole different topic that is based on a lot of prescriptions. But two more quick things, and we can at least pause for this segment. And you and I kind of hinted on this a little bit when we spoke about earlier this week. There are a lot of leaders out there, and I don't know if it comes up with the people that you work with, but there are a lot of leaders out there who are very vigilant about males working with females, females working with other females, and so forth and so on in this kind of era that we're living in Me Too. How do you recommend that male leaders have relationships with female executives have relationships with other female executives, in the modern society today? What is crossing the line, in your opinion?
I think crossing the line is when one diminishes his native human or her native human capabilities. And one diminishes his or her native human capabilities when they begin to view themselves as a him or a her. It is about the human and what the human is imbued with, as opposed to the limitation that one imposes upon themselves when they view things through the lens of male and female.
So is that a conversation that you would have with your team? Let's assume I have an executive team of 10 people, half and half. Is that one of those non-negotiables that we need to establish as a team, is to talk to one another as humans and to kind of put our feelings aside?
I don't think it'll work because it's all about the DNA of the individuals to whom you're speaking. You cannot drop information on top of people like confetti. It doesn't work that way. Um, Most of the things that I say are not going to be applicable to the vast majority of human beings, even though they are fundamentally applicable to all human beings. But in order for something to get into the bloodstream, it has to arrive on the doorstep of an individual who has a particular DNA, whose bloodstream is open to such a thing.
So I'm a
So,
leader of a company and I have that DNA because you've been working with me and I've made that shift that you're talking about. And I want to have this conversation with my team
well,
because I
well,
want
then
to run it like that.
it's about you. It's not about your team. You can sprinkle all the fairy dust on top of your team, and they'll all just laugh at you. They're not going to do anything that you say. So the greatest thing that you could do, the most effective thing that you could do, is for you to imbibe the truth, and whatever dealings that you are in with, that 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 shows up through you. That's all you can do. And as long as you as long as you focus your efforts upon trying to change the mind of another, or to make him better, or to enlighten them, you are wasting your time. Because the fact is, there's only so many years that we as humans live. And those years are most effectively spent perfecting ourselves. And if something is ever going to get across, it is going to get across through osmosis, much less than instruction.
So the byproduct of me perfecting myself is others getting better who are around me.
If it is going to happen at all, that is how it is going to happen. It is not because you give a talk.
All right, last thing. Somebody asked me yesterday, what constitutes a great life for Kapil? So I thought it was a cool question. how do you define a great life, or do you?
No, I don't think that the majority are ready for this, but the great life is in which one is completely oblivious to himself.
And what does
That is
that
the great
mean?
life. That means that one functions in a way that is organic and natural from a place of non-ego without trying to be egoless. To understand that everything that a human being says is filtered through his own personal selfish desires, which are based upon the foundation of ego, and nothing is pure. And to arrive at the place that everything is done from a place of organic naturalness as a natural effect of a cause without any attachment to the person who is saying it.
And are you there?
No.
How
But
close?
well, I don't know how close, but I will say that that is a 24/7 driving force of my life.
And the byproduct of that, I assume that starting with your boys and everyone around you, it just becomes, I mean, it just becomes the way to live, right? It becomes a non negotiable.
Well, it's the only way to truly live, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
Well, it's a good vision to have. How about we leave it like that?
Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.